All right, Jen, let's jump in. Hey,
Hey, Andrew.
how are you?
Great. Happy Aloha Thursday, which is the new Friday, apparently.
Is Aloha, what is Aloha Thursday?
It's a day closer to the weekend after back-to-back Zoom calls.
Nice, nice. Well, thank you for spending Aloha Thursday with me. I really appreciate it. So, to everyone who is attending, welcome to our innovation series at Density. My name is Andrew Farah. I'm co-founder and CEO of Density, and I'm really excited to be here with Jen. Jen, what do you do? Where are you based? What is Raise? What is Raise?
Yeah, so Raise is a technology-based commercial brokerage firm, and my team and I at Raise actually provide workplace as a service for our clients. And what's great about what we do is we're actually true tested warriors. We lived on the client side for many hypergrowth companies. Taking sports as an analogy, we're actually players and we play the game, and we love being able to be thrown in as substitutes for a lot of organizations that are going through different changes.
So, what kind of walk me through your role at Raise and what is it? Who are you typically interacting with? Like, who's your end customer and what are they typically buying?
Yeah, so for Raise, we actually have three go-to-market strategies. We actually have a real estate component, we have a workplace component, and we have a PM design and construction component. My team is responsible for the workplace, both in-house and growing Raise as a workplace organization. And we also externally service clients, meaning we have clients that have different needs. Most recently, as we know, through the pandemic, is being that extra muscle and helping organizations define their return to work strategy. There's been a lot of that, as you can imagine, and we're working with different companies of different verticals and different sizes going through different life cycles.
So, when you talk about workplace, I'm really curious. I mean, I'm in office for the first time in a year, but I presume that's not your office behind you. That might be where you live. I'm curious, like how you've thought about workplace as sort of a service or a consultative work with end customers, over the last year when folks are not able to kind of run some of those experiments inside their own offices.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, a fun fact, my team and I joined Raise during the pandemic. And what was really interesting is given that our background is in workplace, we joined a company with sight unseen, not even actually seeing the workplace organization, understanding how Raise actually worked as a company. So that's definitely new. I'm actually working out of the Bay Area out of my home office. And what I think where workplace has trended towards is it no longer has boundaries. We're no longer confined to four walls, centralized, in San Francisco. We're seeing a trend towards, moving from identified headquarters to distributed, what I call hub quarters, right? So it's a really interesting time where workplace transcends anywhere now.
Um, Most of your organization, would you say that the vast majority of your customers are like high growth tech, or do you have sort of a broader segment that you service?
Actually, it's a broader segment, but what we're seeing is in the high growth tech, a lot of the companies we're working with looking forward to coming back in some shape or form and helping them define what that looks like. What I think is really interesting in actually joining this call and talking to you about density is that a lot of these clients have actually let their leases expire. So currently they're homeless, looking to return. But again, there isn't any data. We only have survey results. We don't have actual data to measure what the potential future could look like.
Why does a broker care about utilization data? And I don't mean to make this about density, but I'm sort of curious. It seems like owners and brokers, sort of as a category, are historically more interested in filling space, even if it's not well optimized. And so I'm just sort of curious, like what is different about either Raise's perspective or yours on why this is useful to brokers and owners, if you want to comment.
Yeah, well, data is really important actually for your leadership within the organization. It has to do with metrics, right? So you start with, when I was on the workplace side in house, we always needed to understand headquarters. We needed to understand headcount, projected headcount, right? And from there, you needed some data point to understand to right size your organization, whether it's 100 square foot per person or the 250 plus if you want to meet the COVID standard. It is a starting point to understand what your needs are.
And so I guess I understand why it would be. I mean, I'm biased, so
Yeah.
I have sort of a perspective or opinion on why it would be relevant. But what does a broker do with data about utilization of any kind? I mean, does it affect deal cycle? Does it affect like what spaces you build into? What is it that you imagine to be um, like the actual role of any type of data, utilization or otherwise, in broker relationships with the client?
Yeah, well, that data is actually really important to help inform a starting point, right? A range of what it is that a tenant may be looking for, whether it's 10,000 square feet, 20,000. I think what's really important now that we don't have enough information is how we're going to use the space, right? Kind of
Hmm.
understanding if a company does want to come back. Does it come back one-to-one seating, 100%, or does it come back in a hybrid? What does that look like? And that's where we need to rely more, the brokers, on the information provided by the actual organization. And we're all still learning.
Right. Yeah, we've had a number of organizations like on this interview series talk about moving from 100% assigned to 100% unassigned as they return, and we're talking about for 4 or 5,000 employees. Um, you have a broad enough customer base that you may be able to sort of give us some type of benchmarking. Are you hearing the same thing? If so, like what percentage or segment or sectors tend to kind of lean into true hybrid as opposed to we're going to have scheduled days where you come in sort of Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Monday, Friday might be a little bit more flexible. I'm curious, just kind of, can you give me a sense of the bell curve?
Yeah, so the true hybrid is actually, that's kind of for me a loaded question, only because in some organizations they are growing hybrid for a few reasons. They actually don't have the real estate to accommodate their actual employees, so they've had to make some trade-offs, and hybrid also is about trade-offs in that instance. In most cases, we're seeing companies want to come back in these hyper growth organizations, but not really understanding to what capacity. And I understand when you and I spoke earlier, I think you mentioned pre-COVID, you saw utilization around 40%, which is funny because back in one of my previous companies, I remember having a debate with our CEO who basically said, I walk around the space, you're telling me that we need more space, and the open workspaces look like they're empty. Well, when we did a study, it was true. 60% of our one-to-one seating was actually being utilized, but 100% of our conferencing collaborative space was being utilized. So in that case, how could we have changed programming to increase capacity of collaborative space and less one-to-one seating?
Yeah, yeah. I'm reasonably convinced that the number of 40% is generous. I think that there's an argument to be had, like pre-pandemic, that utilization rates and well past pandemic, that utilization rates will look substantially lower than what observed space studies tend to conclude,
Mm-hmm.
um, or sort of survey results, which is another sort of
Right.
interesting way of collecting data. There was an article that came out recently about I think it was, I can't remember if it was the CEO of WeWork or something like that, but essentially talking about how people that are in the office are more engaged employees. Curious your take on that. Certainly, as an organization we're an organization that's been distributed for
Mm-hmm.
7 years, um, with sort of offices in a variety of parts of the country. I'm curious, like, is an office necessary for engagement? Is there an actual correlation, or is that sort of a biased take on a provider of physical space?
Yeah, I had a debate with Justin, our CEO at Raise, and he had a really great analogy. He basically said, Jen, try dating someone remote. How does that feel? I'm like, you're right. I probably wouldn't date someone remote. We do miss that serendipity of, bumping into, a coworker, someone I normally wouldn't engage with, let's say someone from the tech side or the engineering team. Um, but I do think that what I do think is the traditional way of thinking about work, it's always been an either or. Either you work in the office or you work from home. Either you have to come to the office or you take
Hmm.
care of an elderly parent or a child. It doesn't need to be an either or anymore. It can be an and. And as we think about coming out of COVID, it doesn't have to be either hybrid or remote. It can be all of the above. And it's really interesting on those companies that have taken the position that we are going to come back, but it's going to be 100% collaborative. Why can't it be and? Why can't I come in for focused work and collaboration?
Yeah, this is I mean, it's funny because like we've been remote for a long time, but we're unwilling to admit it. You know, if you have 3 or 4 floors for a large office, then you're probably running a distributed team. You're just unwilling to admit the fact that people are dialing in from their laptop instead of showing up to a conference room on the fourth floor. Um, I mean, is it possible for organizations that make it mandatory? I mean, I was talking to a CIO of a really large organization. We're talking hundreds of thousands of employees. They are mandating everyone come back to office. Do you think that you think there's a half-life on that? Like meaning that people will vote with their feet, no pun intended, and like leave for other roles that are actually supporting what you're describing as kind of like this both
Mhm.
and? Or is there a world in which like the cultures kind of diverge and they're like the folks that are just like maniacally in office and they can still retain employees?
Yeah, for that CIO, I'd be really interested as to why. Given where we are this past year, what has made them think that it would be important that we all have to come back 100%?
I mean, I don't know. I
Right,
can't, I don't know that I can make the argument, but yeah,
right.
yeah.
So did it affect it? Was a business impacted this past year? What happened? Right. Um, it's interesting. I think in terms of engagement, the one thing that we've learned is we're still learning how to work remote. It wasn't that we were all trained. It wasn't, for example, for Raise, we were an in-office organization. We weren't 30%, remote distributed. And so it was a learned behavior. I mean, we had to learn to engage remotely, and it's been great. I mean, the culture has been amazing. It hasn't really been affected. It's been literally, I've met my coworkers for the first time these past few weeks as we start to come back. And it's great to see them in real life. But also, like you said, I don't miss the commute. I forgot what it was like to actually drive into the city, navigate parking, navigate all those things that, you know, became kind of part of your life, but you hated so much.
So, but you're a purveyor of space, right? So how reconcile those things for me? Like, how do you get an organization filled with gens that feel the way that you feel, um, and sort of the business that you all are in of providing and finding space for folks? Like, how do you sort of like reconcile those things? Because it seems to me there are more gens who feel that way in the world
Yes.
than there are not, and it's more about sort of does their personal life allow for that type of flexibility, meaning like childcare or schools being open or whatever else it might be that allows for home to even be a viable place. I think we often sort of think as like remote or hybrid as like, well, everyone sort of is operating from the same sets of some similar standard in living, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, I think one thing we've all learned in working remote too, which isn't that much different pre-COVID, is we all want variety, right? When we went to a workspace, we wanted the different varieties, the different ways of working. I'm not getting my variety from home. And I'm also not getting the boundaries that I need to be able to work. Somehow working from home means I'm very accessible to my family, which has been actually really distracting. But what I have learned, and I know a lot of gens out there, is that I want that choice. I need that choice to be able to say, hey, team, we need to collaborate in person.
Hmm.
And where are we going to do that? And it's not easy to meet at rendezvous at a coffee shop or at a co-working, and be kind of a transient. It's actually great to be able to have a place where you can stop, actually put your belongings, collaborate with your team, and make it more of a destination. But it's not going to be Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I know from my own team in particular, we want to be at client sites. We want to help them think about their workplace. And then for us, for our own workplace, we want to meet, our colleagues and our counterparts. But we also know that being in traffic for 3 hours when we could be productive sitting at home, are the trade-offs.
Yeah. Um, so to folks listening, if you have questions, don't hesitate to add them to the Q&A and I'll just work them into the conversation. So what does I want to talk a little bit about the future, and like what workplace means. You made this comment about like both and. So, um, should companies be paying for really high speed internet at home? Should they be paying for a portion of your rent? What do you imagine kind of the future of what the definition of workplace is or means when it includes people's living rooms, spare offices, garages, and so forth?
Well, you're going way into the future on, extending the CapEx and the OpEx budget. Every organization is going to be different, and every organization is going to have a different threshold. I think that it's the organization's responsibility to provide, the necessary infrastructure to be productive. And if that
Right.
includes that helping with some of the accommodations or the connectivity and network to your physical space in terms of your ergonomics, that should be part of it. And how a lot of the companies we're working with are resolving that is are either creating, a marketplace for their employees to purchase assets like task chairs or height adjustable desks. Others are just giving a monthly stipend of which I could use, the $200 for family care. I could use it for assets, or I could use it to help pay the rent or any kind of network needs.
Yeah, I guess like it seems like there's this amazing catalyzing event to take budget that was otherwise spent on air travel and hotels and whatever else and spend that on um, the modest needs of better infrastructure so that people can do better hybrid work, um, and still have money left over. Like I actually don't know that it's an extension to CapEx or OpEx, including say $100 that goes towards your internet. And I also think, and I realize this is about you and not about me, so I'm going to keep my comments brief. But it
It
seems
could be and.
okay, and it just seems like internet is internet. Like why would you not want? Why would you not spend the very modest incremental increase to cover the like? Why do we ask um, the employee to decide what they put into their space instead of like, hey, go figure out what internet you need, go figure out what phone plan you need, go figure out whatever sort of stuff you need. I get the concept on stipends for like furniture and whatnot, but we're working from home, running. I mean, Apple kept working, like Apple kept shipping hardware
Mhm.
and did it from home, or at least a large portion of its group from home. Same thing with Google, same thing with Facebook, same thing with sort of all of the big tech giants.
Mhm.
I guess the question is like, what makes our domicile different from our workplace? And what does that mean for the future of what, say, a broker um, or a brokerage then does in a world in which, you're essentially selling spaces that might be both home, like residential and workplace feels like it is starting to become intertwined as opposed to different.
For sure. There was a joke in my family that they basically said you're going to work. Basically, your house, a house is not worth. There's actually no more boundaries, right? Which
Right.
actually was an ouch for me, right? I'm like, no, there is a boundary. And I actually had a colleague of mine who basically said, who worked from home, and said, I actually pack my bag. I walk downstairs, and that's a signal for my family to know I'm actually going to work, and it's off
Hmm.
limits, between the hours of the typical working hour. As far as like the infrastructure, it's really interesting. For brokers, I think we're going to be spending less time building this monolithic headquarters and looking at more of a strategy, kind of looking at labor analytics and kind of studying where your employee base are, is finding the smaller type hubs, so that we can all congregate and create these cohorts, so that we can actually separate the boundaries from our homes, actually. But I don't think that we're not going to never come back to an office. I think that's
Yeah.
definitely going to still be a necessity no matter what.
Yeah. Um, there's a question from a previous guest, Tracy. Um, he said home is the free paywall for CRE. And I guess the question is that a fair employee equation? It's sort of like you're sort of a little bit double taxed. It's like you get you get paid and then you use those dollars to get an apartment or a home or a mortgage, and then you use a portion of that to then go do work for the business that's paying you. Um, is that sort of is there an imbalance there?
Well, it depends on the company. And it's a really great question, Tracy. But did that company allow you to come back to work, right? Those are some of the questions that are the companies that we're working for asking, basically saying, if that is true, we will help you create those accommodations.
Hmm.
What they're not saying is they're not saying within your home, but they're saying is should we give you access to like a WeWork pass, for example?
Yeah, yeah. There's another question about is paying for internet and utilities at home a payoff to have the flexibility and choice of where you work? I'm not sure, David, if I totally understand the term payoff, but I guess maybe if I were to like uh, try to interpret, it's like, and maybe we're spending too much time on this particular topic, so I apologize for continuing on this, but like it just seems crazy to me that we're having a conversation. I'm in an office, you're in your home, you're a broker in the space of like providing office space, and we are all trying to figure out whether or not is this the new office space? And if the answer is yes, then like how do we do that equitably for folks? Um, and does that mean that like things like WeWork become extremely useful? And like now is sort of the time for the ability to have all access passes to some type of co-working space.
Well, we should actually talk to, the federal government if we could actually expense some of the things that we are using at home that we can't because we're not 1099, right? So, I
Right.
mean, that could be, we could go down a separate path with that. But yeah, I think there's an opportunity for all co-working access passes. There's an opportunity for kind of more type of hub type office spaces.
Hmm.
But I think this is why I'm pushing. This is why there's an and for companies too, different companies have different thresholds on how much they can actually give that stipend to support the home base. But I understand that the real estate savings, where you're not having to double down on these humongous, capex and opex spend on the bottom line, opening a facility. But there are different trade-offs, and that's just based. It's not one size fits all.
Why not increase everyone's salaries commensurate with the real estate that you're not using? I guess like because you're talking about real estate is the second most expensive thing next to payroll. Usually the benefits when you're thinking about a all-in cost per head,
Mhm.
you usually will bundle or do like amortization of like your total real estate cost and the perks and everything else that you're investing in there on the individuals. And then of course you use that as a part of your retention and recruitment process with employees. When that's gone, why not sort of take a portion of that and return that back to employees as compensation?
That's a really great question. But then what do you do if employees leave the Bay Area and find a lower cost of living? Do they still
Well,
pay the
that's a
same
great
level of
question.
compensation then?
I don't know, should they? I mean, should they? I guess maybe the question is like, should these boundaries matter? Should these sort of arbitrary lines in various sand around the United States or the world actually have as consequential an impact on taxes or as consequential an impact on your cost of living adjustment or compensation as it does?
I think this is a really slippery slope. Only
Let's go down it.
because,
Let's
yeah,
go
I
down the
know,
slippery
because
slope.
we
Okay,
want to be
okay.
competitive, right? I mean, we all
Yeah.
want to be competitive, but what stops a company from leaving the Bay Area and shipping to internationally, right? To, a lower cost of a labor force with equal number of talent then.
Well, but that option's been availed those companies up into and preceding the pandemic, right? So offshoring is not new. Lots of spectacular talent all over the world that you can sort of outsource to. There must be something to proximity, or there must be something to the American workforce that encourages American companies to beyond just the morals of investing in the American workforce. To invest in the American workforce. So I don't know what that is,
Well,
but
I should be
what
asking you because you've focused density around being in the U.S., right? Your manufacturing is in the U.S. What are your thoughts about going offshore, to reduce the costs so that the technology becomes more available at a lower barrier of entry?
well, two things. One, we manufacture product in the United States at a lower cost than China. So I would actually say it's economical to be in the US, at least on the hardware side. And it's variable based on tariffs and a variety of other
Mhm.
sort of the political winds. But and there are certain volume dependencies to that. But by and large, we were able to sort of compete with sort of on a price basis. The other thing is, we operate in something like 17 or 18 states and at least six countries.
Mhm.
And I'd say that it's less a cost consideration. How do we reduce our costs? The reason we're hiring in these places is not because we're trying to figure out how to get, Kansas rates. Like the
Mhm.
reason is because we found someone spectacular in Kansas, and we found someone spectacular in Taiwan. We found someone spectacular in Mexico. We found some spectacular folks in Canada.
Mhm.
And frankly, that is really hard to do compensation.
I was just going to ask you, do you have universal comp?
Well, it's hard to do compensation,
Yeah.
and I just mean from like a rules standpoint with tax considerations and what's set aside, like whether or not they're independent contractors or they can be full-time employees. Like there's all these sort of rules and regulations around what's possible. And then as to compensation, our right now our model still relies on the geographical cost of where the person is living.
Mhm.
What I think that we're going to need to reckon with at some point is what happens if you move. And some of the things that we've talked about, and um, I realize this is stuff that we've talked about, so I would be pretty transparent about like some of the stuff that we've like sort of considered is, should you sort of peg to a like a tier two city? Should you peg compensation to like a tier two city for everybody, and then you only go up from there on the one, two, or three tier one on a cost basis, tier one cities from a cost basis in the US. And that way you sort of have this like equitable structure that everyone's kind of building off of, as opposed to doing it top down where it's like you pay everybody San Francisco rates, or you pay everyone sort of the absolute minimum you have to pay them based on location. That is a privilege to be able to say as a technology company,
Mhm.
as a venture-backed technology company.
Right.
Um, the vast majority of organizations are not in that same position and are making very different decisions about. Anyway, so I guess I'm not entirely sure, but I'm struggling to understand the logic of if I'm behind a screen in California versus being behind a screen in Delaware. Like, yeah. So anyway, I'm
Yeah, no, but I mean, you were spot on. You basically said it's a privilege, right? Like right now, it is a privilege. It's a privilege. I feel privileged that I can work from my own home and I actually have separate accommodations to say I have my own office, right? So my needs are a lot different, but the needs of my colleagues and everything we're here, like we don't have that privilege and not everyone does. And so having a really high understanding that everyone has a different circumstance and situation is really important.
yeah. Um, can we talk about taxes for a second?
Okay. Not a tax expert, but okay. And
I'm
taxes
not.
are next week, everyone. So
I'm not a taxes expert either. Like, do you think that you will get to a point where you're having a conversation about real estate strategy with a customer and you're like, let's open 8 offices in 8 different cities and it will have zero impact on, or should have zero impact on the various tax strategies you have to have in order to employ these folks? Or are we just stuck with this concept of like statism determining and physical location having the outsized impact on unemployment?
wow. Are we talking about real estate taxes or payroll
No, I
taxes?
mean like payroll tax. I think payroll taxes is probably the easiest one to go
Okay.
after, but like I'm okay with real. I mean, real estate's a little bit more challenging because so much of a state's budget comes from what happens in real estate. So, but like we're little Brady Bunch grid boxes. You know what I mean? Like, why are these things different? Why does residency matter so much?
That's a tough one. I don't.
I mean, I don't know. And maybe this is not the right forum for the conversation, but I don't know. I guess it just seems nuts to me.
Yeah, if we're going down this direction, there's a lot of reasons, pre-COVID, why a lot of companies and a lot of the startup companies I worked with went the co-working route. it removed a lot of these barriers for us. And it can continue to do that while we figure it out in this interim. Um, but I don't think it's scalable, right? As we start getting, for example, you start getting, a heat map of employees in Texas, right? You want an identity, and you don't get that identity in, a temporary type of kind of office accommodations.
Mm.
Right. There's a
So
reason
there's
why
like
you go
a,
to their club for a destination and you're a member of a certain club. They've promised you certain types of amenities, right? You have your own locker, all those things. We don't have that now in a lot of the co-working tech spaces. So how do we create that? How do we create that branding? And how do you create that whole entire environment?
but isn't, but isn't there, I, I, I want to make the counter argument, even though I think I agree with this, with your point. Like, isn't, um, so WeWork, I know we've brought up WeWork a number of times, and not for any particular reason other than it's just sort of like the elephant in co-working. But one of the things that was interesting is like seeing large organizations using WeWork to help build culture and identity for sort of the new generation of workers who didn't want to work in some of the older styled, more conservative structures of the real estate portfolio they had previously. And so like it sounds like what you're saying is, and I agree with it, is like there's a tipping point in which sort of everybody gets the same thing regardless of which company you work at. There's a tipping point in headcount or a tipping point in sort of concentration and density of folks that you're going to want your own independent identity of kind of the broader co-working mass.
Mhm.
But on the other end of the bell curve, you've got large organizations wanting what those co-working spaces provide at sort of en masse and branding it. That, I mean, the enterprise segment of WeWork is pretty substantial. And so I guess I'm curious, can you kind of reconcile those things for me?
Yeah, well, what they provided really well is community, a sense of community. So whether you are a startup company, and you are a team of two in New York and you are a new location, it created that instant community where the larger organizations, they've lost that sense of community. So the co-working type environments help create that. I think where co-working did a really great job, and I'm a huge fan, is the whole enterprise model, which we're starting to see more landlords take that step and change their model in creating shorter term leases, extending, not only TIs, tenant improvements, but
Hmm.
also providing kind of a plug and play office readiness with all the services, right? And I love seeing that too.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's interesting. At the beginning of the pandemic, I would say co-working felt like the least viable investment that you'd want to make, just given sort of the fact that everyone is trying to stay away from one another. Post-pandemic, I sort of imagine a future in which you have access. You should have, I should be able to wander around the United States or internationally, and within a 15-minute walk of any major city, be able to just step into 100 megs down, coffee, a quiet place to take a phone call,
Mhm.
and then to be able to step out, much like you would like a gym for like 24-hour fitness, for instance,
Right.
um, and still have your hubs, still have your spokes of like offices.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it seems like co-working is like likely to be the probably one of the most important pieces to all of this. I mean, because it sort of allows you to scale up and scale down as you see fit.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, we've covered a whole bunch of stuff. Wh- you snap your fingers, the world becomes what you think it will become 10 years from now, the built environment.
Mhm.
What do you see? What do you expect? Um, and what do you think that the pandemic has accelerated?
With all the technology, I'm really fascinated with AI in terms of, you have your phone and you go into your car when you leave your house, and it literally says it's going to take you 10 minutes to get to the office. Like it already understands your behavior. I would love to be able to say I'm opting in with my cohort of teammates, and it will basically tell me based on the behavior of so and so, the other gens in the company, the best meeting time would be this and this and this. Like I would love for it to be so smart to just anticipate my next move with my teammates, in terms of helping foster collaboration.
there's someone who works at Density who is obsessed with the concept of moving walls, that
Yeah.
like the walls would just move themselves based on the demand of the users in the building. And I think I asked him, when do you think this will happen? And he was like, oh, definitely in the next 2 years. I think we sort of disagree on the timeline, but yeah, it seems like there's a circumstance in which buildings start to become substantially better at predicting what it is that humans need, or at least the systems behind it.
Mhm.
I know that was certainly the objective with organizations like Comfy, where it was like adjusting temperature based on the need of the individual. Um, cool. Jen, I really appreciate you spending time with me and wandering through tax law and like very like borderless work and all this other stuff. If folks wanted to reach out to Raise or to you, what is the best way to get in touch?
Really easy. It's Jen, Jen at raise.org.
Cool. And Jen, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thanks, Andrew.
See you.